I'm defying. Hard labor, I came here to modify the system. Take them down if they ain't listening. Straight demolition. From young, everything resistant. Good times, I don't really miss them. Gotta pay the cost, no ticket. Wicked. This hard labor and I'm kicking. Never fit in with the crowd or got into politics. You can tell I'm built different. Trust me, it'll be a sequence of events if you touch me. Even when the women do it, love. I've been eye to eye with great people, but you'll be mistaken if you put another one above. Welcome, everyone. I am your host, Conrad Brogus. Welcome to This Week in Tyranny. It's episode 74. Basically, this is a show where I come here every week. I'm on my couch. I put this green thing over the couch, and then low budget production, and then I proceed to deliver one of the most information dense, direct, hardcore, hour or so of internet video that you can get, so this is what I do. And I started this way because I want to thank all you guys who tune in, who have been tuning in, who've been with me for since episode 1 or have joined along the way. Because when I get my situation in order over here, I'm gonna buy a studio, I'm gonna get all this equipment, I'm gonna have like a better intro, better productions, all the graphics, and I'll hire somebody to do this as well, and then this show will do some real damage. This will be like the early days that you look back on, because it's 74 episodes and I do not plan on stopping. So we're gonna get right into the material. I don't know if I mentioned, it's May 5th, right? Beginning of May. It's getting warm. So I got a topic that I really don't like to talk about. It's one of these uncomfortable ones, but we're gonna do it. It's really gonna be a 2-part series. I had to break it up into 2 parts. I wanted to do an article breakdown of an article called "Thousands in the United States Believe COVID Vaccines Harm Them. Is Anyone Listening?" And then I was going to talk about the straw man argument, about damage control, about controlling public opinion. But it got derailed because this is a New York Times article by Apoorva Mandavili written on May 3rd. And I was going through this, and then I thought, this is really starting halfway, because for me to read an article and then talk about the messaging and the agendas in the article, the manipulation of the thoughts, for that to really stand on its own and make sense to someone, I first have to talk about who owns the newspaper publishing the article, right? Who owns the organizations that are in charge of communication, in charge of information, in charge of influencing and molding the minds of the people. Who controls that? Who owns that, right? So that's why this episode is going to be called something like "The Role of Jews in the Occult Web of Control." So, inflammatory title. Of course, I'm starting off being inflammatory. That's why I don't like to do it. Because I'm all about standing up for the underdog, for the oppressed people, the marginalized people. And this is about a group of people that claims to be that, So, disclaimer, I am a hardcore individualist. All humans are created equal under the law of nature's God, so everybody has the same quality and quantity of rights, the same rights to property, which means their life, their body, and their living space, and all their possessions. And on a personal level, I just really don't care about race or religion or where you come from. I don't care. I only care about individuals, their behavior, their character, and really how they treat me, Either I like someone or I don't. Which means I'm not prejudiced, bigoted, racist, transphobic, sexist, or anti-Semitic, right? Standard disclaimer. But because I'm an individualist, I also don't respect any kind of claims to group privileges, like group rights, special rights, peer pressure to cater to some people and not cater to others. I don't like that. I'm not going to flinch just because somebody threatens me with some sort of social influence to be politically correct. I don't respect that either, right? Those two things go together, and because of those two things, I'm going to explore some claims and some realities about Jewish people today. And that's in light of the pro-Palestine protests at these different universities, right? And then also this New York Times article, because I have to talk about who owns the New York Times. Before I dive into this, I want to start with the definition. Really, what is my definition when I'm going to talk about Zionism? It's not that it's my definition. It's my paraphrasing of it. Right? Zionism is a Jewish nationalist movement, right? But for me, it's Jewish elitism. Zionism is like Jewish supremacy. Like you have white nationalism, you got like the Aryan Brotherhood and everybody, white power, white people are the best. That's white nationalism. Then you got black nationalism, which is like, more extreme than the 5%ers. White people are the devil. Black people created all cultures, and then the white man crawled out of the caves and stole all their inventions and their culture. That's black nationalism. And then you have Jewish nationalism, and that's Zionism. The curious thing is only one of those is accepted as being a legitimate ideology, and that's Jewish nationalism. Zionism is not as taboo as the other ones, right? And the way they've done this is it's a classic strategy of occult rulership. It's really called a false flag or infiltration. You put on the uniform of another group of people. And throughout history, the Jewish people they were a group of persecuted people. Often they were highly moral because they, their roots in the Hebrew Bible that did have a code of morality amongst each other, at least, right? They were driven, hardworking people, and for the most part, those people have been eliminated. They've been killed throughout history, or they've been traumatized by centuries of violence. That changes somebody. And today, you look around, you see Jewish people, they're highly elitist, often racist, and definitely condescending. Now, how did that happen, right? How did that happen? On this show, I want to get into the historical aspects. So you've got this claim. It's all about this claim. And the claim is a lineal claim to ownership of property. It's a claim to property rights. And being Jewish is unique in the sense that it is both a religious and an ethnic group, right? So you could be Jewish by faith, but not by birth, like a convert. Or you can be Jewish by birth, but not faith. You could be born in Israel, but not be practicing Judaism. Or you could be both. Okay, that's not the only group of people that has that quality, but it's the most notable one. However, the point is that both of those are still just claims to a lineage of rulership. It's because the Hebrew Bible talks about Abraham and Moses receiving direct ruling power from God through that covenant, right? And the historical accuracy of that is not really what's important. What's important is that this becomes the basis for claiming the divine right to rule. The right that because you've got your power from God, it's okay and it should not be questioned. And this is why for modern tyrants, Judaism is their chosen religion. Not the tyrants like dictators or kings and queens. We're talking about the people who rule from the shadows, right? This has always been the accusation against Jewish people, is that they control things from the shadows. Well, the people who do control things from the shadows, they say they're Jewish. That's what they say. It's their chosen religion because the doctrine of divine right fits right in to that culture. Now, these are infiltrators of Judaism, and these people, they do not care for the other Jewish people throughout the world, especially the ones who are not Jewish by birth. You'll see this theme again and again, is that the birth is very crucial. Now, the infiltrators, they don't care about them, and they will throw off the Jewish mask effortlessly as soon as there is any trouble, and they're going to put on the next mask, and that's how that goes. So let's take us into the New York Times, because I looked up, I don't know off the top of my head who owns the New York Times, but when I was going to make claims about the agendas they're pushing, well, I got to find out who actually owns it. So the New York Times is owned by the Ochs Sulzberger family. So directly Adolf Ochs, or Ochs, had Jewish parents who immigrated from Germany. He purchased the New York Times in 1896. Then his daughter marries Arthur Hayes Sulzberger, who also had Jewish parents. And then her father was Cyrus Leopold Sulzberger, who was a merchant, philanthropist, and Zionist. He attended the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, in 1895 as one of the 5 American delegates. So, like, big deal, you know, these guys were Jewish. What's wrong with Jewish influence? Well, if you're talking about Jewish influence, especially in Europe, Switzerland, and things like that, you got to talk about Rothschilds. And the Jewish Rothschild banking family has been the wealthiest family in the world for hundreds of years, and therefore the most powerful family, because money has, you know, taken in the last. It's been a symbol of power for a long time now, or a measure of power. So they're the most powerful family. And you can trace it back to, most notably, Mayer Amschel Rothschild in the 1700s, who brought it to prominence. He came to power through concentrating wealth in the family, right? And the Rothschilds, they had, the way they set themselves apart is they had other family members set up different branches of banks in different parts of the city. Because in these times, the 1700s, you had Jewish ghettos. They would have their own. They would have their own part of the neighborhood, and they dealt amongst themselves as tight-knit cultures do. And people who don't have their own nation, if they're living in another nation, they will have this area where they live. You know, the same thing with Polish people here, Asian people here in America. That's not just persecution of a historically persecuted group. That's kind of par for the course throughout history. So what they did is they had people set up banks that didn't just deal with Jewish people, but through other groups of people. And they would hide that they were actually from the Rothschild family. They would take on different names. They would market themselves in a different way. You know, it's a good business operation. These are good business practices if you want to make some money. And they masked that they were all part of the Rothschild dynasty. The way it was a dynasty, you know, at the same time, the way they were able to keep their money and make this a banking family dynasty is because they started implementing the practice of carefully arranged marriages. So they were arranging marriages between each other, kind of like the royalty of Europe in the Middle Ages and times before. So again, I said this was going to be a theme. Money and heredity become the focus. And this is just divine right. And you'll see this theme again and again. I just want to point it out there. Highlight that. Now later down the line, you have Nathan Mayer Rothschild in the 1800s funding the Napoleonic Wars, specifically funding England. Right? So this gives you an idea of how much money they have. They're funding an entire world superpower in their war against another world superpower. So Mayer Nathan Rothschild, he makes a fortune through speculation, and there's that story of getting news of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo a day early. That story is well known, and actually that story has been brought into question by revisionist historians. You know, they try to fact check that now and say, no, he didn't actually do that. He didn't actually do the you know, what's today known as a bank run, and through telling people that Napoleon actually won, stocks and the whole economy went down, allowing him to purchase all the property up and then make money after the news comes out that Napoleon actually lost. But regardless of that, you know, this is not news to anybody that the Rothschilds have a lot of money, that there are a lot of wealthy Jewish people in history. You know, big breaking news alert, right? Who didn't know that? And being healthy does not make you a tyrant or a bad person. I especially just last episode talked about how I don't agree with that, right? And even deceptive business practices, like this is a controversial view of mine. This is, most people don't agree with this. I personally don't think that usury or predatory lending is immoral. I don't like it, but it's not a violation of property, so it can't be immoral. You know, if you want to take a loan from somebody, if they make a, you know, as long as you're an adult, whatever terms you agree to, that's the terms you agree to, unless you're being forced out of your property, right? So Jewish people owning businesses and owning Hollywood itself is not even a problem, because ownership is individual. Like, the Jews don't own anything. This is false, right? A certain person owns something. He owns this particular company. And if they have the same ideology, they have the same philosophy, yeah, that becomes a problem. But you still can't blame somebody just because they're part of a certain family or they're part of a certain group. that they own something collectively, because the ownership is not collective, it's individual. So you can't blame a group of people for the actions of one person. But what most people don't understand is there's this Jewish and Satanist influence on philosophy. And philosophy matters. And that's why I'm going to talk about two of the most influential philosophers in modern times who happen to be by lineage Jewish. And probably the most influential philosopher in modern times is Karl Marx, unfortunately. But, this is a person whose thoughts and ideas and writings, brought on world wars, 100 million deaths plus, completely changed the world we live in, and killed freedom, really in the world, and is responsible for wiping out some of our greatest, men and women, and, cutting out entire nations and generations, and they'll never come back from it. So Marx, his father was Herschel Halevi, who was Jewish, who converted in order for him to keep practicing as a lawyer. So he changed his name to Marx. He, publicly gave up Judaism and changed his religion. But, this is a Jewish person, and it's pretty commonly known that Marx is a third cousin of Rothschild, of the Rothschilds, right? One of them. Now, most people are going to scratch their heads and think about what they know about Karl Marx and what they know about, Judaism, and tell me, how are you associating Marx with Zionism? Marx was an atheist. He hated God, he hated money, he hated capitalists, he hated the bankers. So he's like the opposite of Jewish, right? Well, that's not the case. And people need to become aware of what is called labor Zionism. You should look it up. And labor Zionism is the leftist faction of Judaism. It's Marxist Jewish ideas. And what people don't know is that was actually the dominant way of thinking of Jewish people in the years leading up to World War I and later. And many of Israel's institutions today, like the IDF, their military, the Israeli military, that was created by labor Zionists. And here's to depict this link. This is an anti-Semitic caricature from Spasa Sveta. They say it's an anti-Semitic caricature, right? This is from Karl Relnick in Prague in 1926. This is entitled Saint Marx, Friend of Baron Rothschild and Leader of the Poor Christians. So they say this is an anti-Semitic cartoon, right? But these things like this, they're called political cartoons. Today we call these political cartoons. It is not at all anti-anything to depict Donald Trump this way or Joe Biden this way. That would be okay. And this link here between socialism and Zionism is very taboo. People don't like this. People don't like the Star of David above Karl Marx. But I'm going to talk about the link, which goes deep. And just to, really go into this, I'm going to read a quote from Mikhail Bakunin, one of Marx's opponents, from 1871. Now, what I'm about to read from him, it does contain what to me is anti-Semitism, which I don't agree with. Like, you can tell that Bakunin is emotionally frustrated, and he's projecting his feelings of injustice onto the entire group of people. Right? Not a good thing to do. I don't do that. However, that does not mean that his statements are not accurate. They're highly accurate. So here we go, Me versus YouTube Community Guidelines from Bakunin, 1871. Himself a Jew, Marx has around him in London and France, but especially in Germany, a multitude of more of the less clever, intriguing, mobile, speculating Jews. Such as Jews are everywhere: commercial or banking agents, writers, politicians, correspondents for newspapers of all shades, with one foot in the bank, the other in the socialist movement, and with their behinds sitting on the German daily press. They have taken possession of all the newspapers, and you can imagine what kind of a sickening literature they produce. Now this entire Jewish world, which forms a single profiteering sect, a people of bloodsuckers, a single gluttonous parasite, closely and intimately united not only across national borders but across all differences of political opinion, This Jewish world today stands for the most part at the disposal of Marx and at the same time at the disposal of Rothschild. I am certain that Rothschild for his part greatly values the merits of Marx, and that Marx for the most part feels instinctive attraction and great respect for Rothschild. This may seem strange. What can there be in common between communism and the large banks? Oh, the communism of Marx seeks enormous centralization in the state, and where such exists, there must inevitably be a central state bank. And where such a bank exists, a parasitic Jewish nation which speculates on the work of the people will always find a way to prevail. And there is your link between communism and Zionism. It also makes the link specifically between the newspapers and what these people publish. And the best link it makes is that this is all about centralization. That's what Zionism is about. It's about obtaining more power. Zionism and socialism is about how can we take something that's not ours and rightfully make it ours, and we will get it. It's exactly the same thing, actually. And labor Zionism is something that hardly anyone talks about, mainly because it no longer exists. Because since becoming a nation, the nation of Israel, the socialist faction went away, and Israel became conservative and it became capitalist. Why? Because ownership of property is private. So they had to, because socialism is very good at taking someone else's property away. It's not very good at keeping the property once you've taken it away, right? If everybody's socialist, then everybody keeps taking everybody's property. So that's why it took the nation of Israel. This is, this is a loose paraphrasing of what actually happened, but it is true to what actually happened. After they've taken the nation of Israel away from the Palestinians, then the nation of Israel is created, and then they made they made the lineal claim to property for one group of people, right? And socialism for the rest of the world, to redistribute the property to them. So it's one thing for them and the next thing for everybody else. So you started out with labor Zionism to kind of get the revolution going, to get the people there, and then no more of that. Now we're all for ownership of property, that now that they have it. And that's why labor Zionism no longer exists, because their communist revolution was successful. And now Zionism preaches communism to the rest of the world through modern day Agenda 21 and stuff like that, so that more of the world's property can be redistributed. And this is done through movies, through media, through the New York Times. That's the point. Remember, not by Jews as a people, by the occult ruling class who obtains and maintains their power through subterfuge, right? Like the original Rothschilds, through under the table practices. This is how they keep their power. And just like Satanism, they have this thing in common, that they preach one thing to the rest of the world and practice a whole another ideology, a whole another set of values internally. Externally, they preach a different ideology to the masses. And these people that, created the nation of Israel, I'm not saying that it was easy and that it was handed to them on a platter. There was a lot of fighting for this, and these people, these labor Zionists, and not only them, they were for the most part useful idiots. Like Joseph Trumpeldor, who was all about total service to the Jewish people. He was happily died to sacrifice for the Jewish nation in battle, right? Like, this is actually like a Jewish martyr. They were Jewish heroes, It's not all bankers. People don't get this. And Theodor Herzl, even the founder of Zionism, he wrote many sensible things. And many of Jews throughout history, they did have the spirit of freedom, because they have been persecuted for thousands of years. These were just regular people taking the abuse, because that group is a scapegoat because of a parasitic group of people within their ranks. So there have been plenty of persecuted Jews. It's not a hoax, guys. But the persecuted Jew is a thing of the past. But that's being revived, not because of nationalism or because of conspiracy theorists, but because of the actions of the state of Israel and the Western world's support for their authoritarian Nazi behavior with the Palestinians. That's why the people are starting to become anti-Semitic again, because it's like when you have a family and you're giving all the love to one child and neglecting the other. You will create tension in the most loving family. Not to mention people who are from different ethnicities and have histories of war and different cultures and different religions. So that's how you do that, you know. You're creating the powder keg. And this is of course funded by who? By the same, you know who I'm talking about. The Rothschild types who are going to fund wars to make sure that they can acquire more property. And the current climate, it's a highly polarized yet still a repressed climate. It's the kind of climate where I feel uncomfortable about saying the things I'm saying in this episode, because anti-Semitism is this powerful accusation thrown around for just exploring history. And that type of climate was influenced by thinkers like Marx, the whole social friction thing, class friction, by Marx, and the other one of the two most influential Jewish philosophers, who was Baruch Spinoza. He was a Portuguese Jewish man from the 1600s, and he is commonly known as the first secular Jew, meaning non-religious. And really, Spinoza was an occult philosopher, and his philosophy, he's one of the influencers of modern day Satanism. And that's how it happens with occultists, is that they'll speak a lot of truth, they speak a lot of real things, and they make key fatal mistakes. That you'll see that with a lot of occultists, especially people like us as Spinoza. A couple of his quotes: "I call him free who is led solely by reason." You know, that's for the most part that's true. Freedom is what we experience when we're living in accordance with reality. When we can look at what is happening in the world, if we're not lying to ourselves, if we're not lying to others, for the most part, that is when we experience freedom. Spinoza also taught that the true aim of government is liberty. He asserted the ultimate aim of government is not to rule or restrain by fear, nor to exact obedience, but to free every man from fear, so that he may live in all possible security. That's a remarkable thought. And to free every man from fear is actually an example of early American philosophy, right? It's early capitalism. It's that freedom and security is on one side of the spectrum, and fear and obedience is on the other. That's actually true. That's actual reality. That's been mixed, right? Because of all the terrorist attacks and all the false flags and the Holocaust and everything. People think that security and obedience is over here on one side, and then and there's all this fear about freedom, right? And therefore you have to have obedience. But so they invert those things, they conflate those things. But to free every man from fear, he's talking about a system, an agreed upon system, where there's faith that there's a shared moral code. It's not faith, it's a type of agreement that the person down the street is not going to rob you. It's freeing people from fear. What that means is living in a culture where the use of force to take people's property is not accepted. So you know, this is brilliant thinking, brilliant thoughts. And those of you who know Spinoza are probably saying, oh my God, like, are you supporting Spinoza? Like, who is this guy? If you know him. But that's the thing. There's deep nuance here, because just like the Satanists, Spinoza does look at reality as it is, and for the most part accepts it. And he focuses not on emotions and magical thinking, but on real world action. So where is his fatal mistake that I mentioned? It's, as with all the Satanists, it's their fatal mistake. It's moral relativism, it's materialism, and it's the rejection of free will. And this is what, you know, destroys the whole thing. Spinoza famously held the view that nothing is inherently good or evil. He was one of the first people to say that. if you look at the history of that, you can loosely link that to the Greek philosophers. But of modern times, this is like your progenitor of the rejection of free will, right? He was not an atheist in name, right? He didn't call himself an atheist. He believed in God, but he equated God with nature, and he talked about natural law the way I do, but not the true natural law, which is an ordering force for the universe founded on moral objectivism. But it's his idea that natural law was determinism, like a Darwinian type of nature. So that's what he's talking about with nature. That since God is the owner of all property, right? He's everything, then everything is an extension of him, and therefore we have no choice. We have no power over our desires. It's a very materialistic worldview. And reading from him, because our minds and the events in our minds are simply ideas that exist within the causal series of ideas that follows from God's attribute of thought, our actions and volitions are as necessarily determined as any other natural events. In the mind there is no absolute or free will, but the mind is determined to will this or that by a cause that is also determined by another, and this again by another, and so to infinity. So this is where he goes away from reality and he starts going into his batshit crazy worldview, because that's what happens with Satanists. This is where they go wrong. It's material determinism. If you could, I almost wish Satanism wasn't called Satanism, because it's materialistic determinism, and it's a religion, and it's a religion that's been proven false by quantum physics, particle physics, the quantum experiments. Right? We know that's not true. That a cause is not determined by another cause, and then there's not a link of events. That's actually been proven false by science, but it maintains throughout philosophy. But he talks about that our actions are extensions, an extension of the mind of God. His idea of extension correctly identifies the idea of fractality, of a fractal universe, which, he gets key things correct, right? So you could see how you could utilize Spinoza's philosophy to improve your condition throughout the world, but then you could also use it to control others, because there is nothing inherently good or evil, right? And everything's a determined cause anyway, so that means there could be no moral judgment placed on somebody for, raping somebody or stealing somebody's property, because, it's not their fault that they felt like it. But this, that you can, utilize this philosophy to get money and then control others, that sounds a lot like Zionism, right? And of course, if you look into it, Zionists love Spinoza. They love him. And, the point I'm making is that Judaism is only the chosen, agreed upon religion of modern day Satanists that don't want to call themselves Satanists, so they call themselves Jews. And it's Judaism because that is the religion that has preserved the direct line of ownership of property, meaning power, right? A direct line of power, going back to the original covenant with Yahuwah, with the Jewish people in the Old Testament. That is where their claim to and their pursuit of power comes from. And Satanism focuses on the same idea, just in a more secular form. Because Satanism focuses on genetics, and that inherited traits and material abundance, that is the ultimate source of power, like Spinoza said. But Satanists also focus highly on lineage, not necessarily being born into it, but making that claim to the power of rulers and dynasties past. And that is why the 4 tenets of Satanism are moral relativism, I talked about it, egotism, which is the idea, just total, it's self-preservation. It's not egotism, it's self-preservation, which is in itself tied to genetics, right? It's Darwinian. And then you have natural selection and social Darwinism, or social Darwinism and eugenics, not natural selection. Natural selection is more tied to self-preservation, which is the other one of the 4 tenets. So the point is, you've really got 3 of those satanic tenets that are their main core beliefs, their values. They have to do with genetics throughout nature. This is what Hitler believed in. This is what all these people who want to go out and do genocide, right? Pol Pot and all this. It's about ethnic cleansing, right? So this is where it comes from. It's modern day Satanism, and it comes very much from Marx in a certain way, in a certain aspect, and Spinoza. These are remember, Jewish influential philosophers. And modern day Satanists, this is what they believe. So they, of course, take on the mask of Judaism, and they give Jews a bad name because of that. So Judaism is just their chosen, agreed upon religion. Now Israel, the country, is just their chosen, agreed upon homeland. That's all it is. And hey, by their fruits you shall know them, right? So look at Israel. Like, what is Israel like today? It's highly secular. Over a third of them are not religious, although they're a religious nation, supposedly. It contains both extreme left and extreme right political factions, right? There's Netanyahu's pretty conservative, right-wing authoritarian, and then it goes all the way to labor Zionism, and you have that as well. But that's without conflict. You see, within Israel, there's not this polarization. There's not so many protests. They're highly organized. They're highly together, and there's no infighting within this political system. They largely keep to their own. Okay, they're a very tight-knit nation, and most importantly, as I've mentioned before, they preach one thing to the world, and they practice the opposite behavior amongst themselves. And that's just like Satanists. That's the same thing. Satanism will tell, like, for example, that is where a lot of this gender rhetoric, right, mixing genders, changing your gender, all this stuff, this is put forward by, directly, that's admitted by people who are Satanists, what they want to do. Androgyny is is like a common, well-known historical feature of Satanists, right? LaVeyan Satanists and so on and so forth. That is what they preach to the world, but within themselves, they're actually very highly ordered. These dark occultists, they know who they are. They don't practice the stuff that they preach to others. And like Satanists, the Zionist Jews, they have a contempt for the masses. It's just the truth. There's a disgust, and so many people will say this to me. I've never been to Israel. I've spoken to people who have been there, and it's like they look down on you. Even here, in America, they'll see they look down on you. A lot of these Jewish people, and the way they see it, most of the world is just dumb and will never change. And you know what? I kind of agree with them. They've been unfortunately correct historically. We haven't proven them wrong yet, right? But where Satanists and Zionists differ from me is that they see nothing wrong with pushing the world further into degradation, right? Pushing these people further into their destruction. That is where, that is where we split, because I don't get down like that. So let's leave history in the past and talk about the Zionist influence in the world today. Now this is about something that I wanted to talk about that I haven't yet. It's called Tikkun Olam. It's the concept called repairing the world. And Tikkun Olam, let's go into this article. I'm going to read from it. It's called Tikkun Olam and Corporate Social Responsibility by Jeffrey Levine. Levine. He's of course a corporate CFO, so right. So he's a corporate guy. Just so you know where he's coming from. Not saying that all Jewish people think like this. Last Rosh Hashanah, who would have imagined the year we had? We had great hopes for 2020. Who would have imagined the effect of COVID-19, unemployment, whole industries such as tourism being shattered, racial tension, and continuing divisive and anger by the people? We all feel helpless. We also, in our minds, look for a better world from our COVID-19 experience. We have looked for the silver cloud in COVID-19. Crises are opportunities for change and growth. We are seeing the tremendous investment in AI, big data, digital and cloud solutions, and ed tech. There are some amazing diagnostic and digital healthcare innovations that are being developed. There's a lot of money pouring into these initiatives. Jody Cohen, in a new book called Tikkun Olam, or Heal the World, shows how citizens of this startup nation are taking aim at the world's latest pandemic. This book charts how in that short period of time, the Israeli high-tech industry has adapted its technologies and partnerships and quickly created new ones to apply itself to the biggest crisis facing the world. And here's the cover of that book he talks about. Tikkun Olam, Israel versus COVID-19. Subtitled, How is one of the planet's smallest countries helping to tackle the world's biggest challenge? And then you see the Israeli flag on the mask. So this really ties in together both what the New York Times article is about and what I wanted to talk about with Tikkun Olam in general. It's just glorious. They make all these admissions for me. So more than me taking now a sidetrack and talking about it, I'm going to go through and just keep going through it and let him tell it. Because he makes all these connections for me. And this is just an article I found like an hour ago. But some bullet points about, I had to search it up. Well, how did Israel respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, right? I wasn't paying attention in 2020. I was very much living wild back then still. I didn't have this channel back then. So Israel on March 17, 2020, they made contact tracing mandatory. And the Shin Bet, their intelligence agency, they tracked the people on their phones during their quarantine. It was the only nation to do so. They actually surveilled their people. It happened like nothing, March 17th. This is before we even get the original stay-at-home orders. So that's Israel. Very authoritarian, very, very cracked down. It was also the first country to introduce a vaccine passport. And it was actually called the Green Pass. And I have to laugh at that. Not just because people associate Jewish people with the dollar and the color green. But the color green more so as environmentalism, and you'll see that Tikkun Olam today is environmentalism. And then Israeli government tried to make the vaccine actually mandatory for the entire country, but could not. They're not that far along in their agenda yet. So continuing with this article, these changing social norms have consequently disrupted outdated models of corporate behavior while resulting in the rise of terms such as corporate social responsibility, CSR, and conscious capitalism. Nowadays, corporations wield substantial economic power even more than some countries. This is what I've been saying. And a quote from William Clay Ford Jr. that he uses in the article is, creating a strong business and building a better world are not conflicting goals. They are both essential ingredients for long-term success. And remember, last episode I talked about the United Nations. I talked about corporations for sustainability, the government corporate partnership, and technocracy. And this is that. This is that again. Back to the article. In Judaism, we have the concept of Tikkun Olam, fixing the world. One of the most powerful statements ever written on this is by the prophet Yeshayahu, which we read just before the Tisha B'Av. Learn to go good, seek justice, straighten dishonesty, arbitrate in the orphan's claims, and come to the widow's defense. Back to the article. This is a chilling reminder that if we fail to carry our social responsibility, then life as we know things will take a turn for the worse. And this, in the original way he's using it, is completely true. The original meaning of Tikkun Olam is completely true. It's actually the great work. We do have a responsibility to take care of the world, right? To, as it is in this text, to seek justice, right? To straighten dishonesty. Well, these are the people I talk about. I mean, these are the things I talk about. These are the things you need to do. But that's not what they're doing today. What Tikkun Olam is today is preaching social justice, is preaching United Nations Sustainable Agenda, Agenda 21, and all these things, right? You know, the gender changing surgeries. This is what Israel is supporting today. Genetic modification, yes, like these are facts. You can look this up. But in the original sense, completely true. So again, this is Judaism being hijacked. Back to the article. COVID-19 has been a wake-up call. It has highlighted the need for government, local municipalities, the Bank of Israel, and banks to consider the needs of the people, the customer. And I laughed at, you know, the people, you know, the customer. I mean, if you were trying to make it up, to make up, you know, like this Jewish guy trying to speak and just actually revealing this whole Zionist thinking, could you even make that up? You know, the people, the customer, you know, the banks have to look out for the customer. And COVID-19 has been a wake-up call. We need to help them out, you know. You could just see the Rothschild thinking, you know, the Rothschild thinking. These people laugh at us for really like buying to this whole religion thing, because they don't care about religion. They don't care about what mask they put on. These people are sociopaths. They just care about getting theirs. They don't care what you think of them. This is like psychopaths. They don't have shame, right? They don't have like shame and guilt. They just do what will get them the most, and then fuck you. That's how it goes. So, but keep in mind, originally Tikkun Olam is the great work. It is what I'm doing here now. But today, it is about global government, specifically through environmentalism and social justice. And indeed, if you look it up, that's how Tikkun Olam is used today. And let's finish this article now. He says it. However, innovation is not enough. There needs to be a greater corporate change by companies, management, and the directors in driving environmental, social, and corporate governance. ESG. Impact accounting, corporate social responsibility, and treat your customers fairly. The challenge is to combine this with innovation, AI, big data, and corporate social responsibility to make our world a better place. So this is your admission. He puts a bow tie on everything that I've been saying. And this is just, you know, any guy that's writing an article to, you know, to corporate people. This is not even a big shot like Brzezinski, but you see this, the mentality is coming out. This is out in the open. And, you know, just to conclude this, I really tried to keep it short. We've made it under an hour. But when you look at this, there's nothing Jewish about what he's saying. What he's saying is a hybrid of Marxism and technocracy with a Jewish mask on. And that's all it is. And that's it. And thank you, and I'll see you next week on part 2, where I'll go into this article about the people who are damaged from COVID-19 and about the messaging in that article, even though it's discussing a thing that, you know, has been like a suppressed voice, right? Suppressed voices. So we're going to get into that. That'll be in part 2. I had to break it up into 2 parts. So thanks, and I'll see you next week on This Week in Tyranny.
In this tournament, the chosen few shall be triumphant, and the devil will be decapitated. So you can keep your ducats and your dresses. I won't be emasculated in this world of scientific madness. Scientific madness. My status is the baddest.